Hello, everybody, and welcome to the sixth webinar for the Timpson programme. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. A little bit of background, first of all, about the Timpson programme itself. I should have said my name is Neil Harrison. I'm the director of the Timpson programme and deputy director of the Rees Centre at the University of Oxford. The Timpson programme is working with 300 schools across 26 different local authorities in England, and the work that we're doing is looking at how the schools can become more attachment aware and trauma informed in their practices, and also looking at the impact of particularly of training and whole school approaches to working with young people who've got a history of trauma. And as I alluded to a second ago, we've done 5 of these webinars previously. They're all available online. So if you would like to go back and have a look at ones we've done in the past, they focused, for example, on the experiences of different schools, what they've done and how they've achieved a more trauma-informed and attachment-aware approach. And also looking at some of the early findings from our research as well. So they're all available through our website at the Rees Centre, but also we have a YouTube channel where you should be able to find those as well. So in terms of today's session, I'm delighted to welcome Luke Rodgers to be our presenter today. Delighted partly because it's Luke and partly because we've got the technology working this time, which is fantastic. Luke is the Director of Strategy for the Care Leaders, an organisation working with local authorities and schools to improve their practices. Luke was awarded the British Empire Medal in 2018 for his work in the past around children in the care system and families as well. So we're absolutely delighted to have Luke with us today.
So yeah, my name's Luke Rodgers, and I'm from an organisation called the Care Leaders, where I am the Director of Strategy. So today's presentation is mainly an experiential journey through education as a child in care. What we do at the Care Leaders is we believe in what's known as lived experience leadership. So it's how can you use your lived experience through whatever your lived experience is. Our lived experience is of children's social care. How does that convert into a form of leadership where you can inform the way services are designed and developed through using that story? What lived experience leadership is not somebody just coming along and telling you about their experiences in life with no idea of a solution to provide you. We started this work at the Care Leaders because we really saw the power in sharing stories, and we also saw the danger when we ask young people to share their stories about their experiences. They can be quite raw, and without the right support and the right guidance, young people sharing those stories can somewhat re-traumatize. But there's a huge power in hearing people's stories and understanding what their experience is really like for young people going through care. My particular focus is about relationships, and I've always said that when the system changes or when I become too old, I'll stop sharing my story, whichever one comes first. And I think it's looking like I'm going to become too old first before the system changes. But there's so much relevance still in the stories that I share, which are about relationships. Ultimately, all today is going to be discussing with you is really understanding how to build authentic relationships with young people, but understanding the systematic pressures, the myths around that can sometimes leave us confused whether we can or can't build relationships with young people, whether we can or can't say particular things. And I'm hoping that these 2 concepts that I'm going to share with you today, based on my personal experiences, can give you some insights to understand what it's really like for a child in care going through school. So this says 3 things. I've actually included an additional 2, but the 3 main things I want you to remember from this presentation is that you inherit the system in which you work in. So whether that's a school, whether that's children's social care, whatever organisation you work in, you inherit it. And what you inherit within that system is a list of rules and a culture which you naturally adhere to. It is not you. You are not the systems that you work for or work within. You are an individual and you are a human. So when I start to explain some of these concepts, I just want you to remember that a lot of the things that I'm going to talk to that can be challenging for young people in care are systematic and they've got nothing to do with humans. So the worst thing that we can do is identify with the system, is become it, because then when we start to communicate to it, we can somewhat become defensive and maybe offended. But to give you an idea of something that we inherit as a system thing is a looked after children's review. So for those that don't know what that is, that's when we ask young people to share quite intimate things about their life experiences around the table of professionals, which could include their teachers, their foster carers, their social workers. And we'll ask them questions like, when was your latest sexual experience? So that's a system that we inherit. I don't believe that's the best way to engage young people in decisions that are influential in their lives, but the system seems to think so. The second thing is how we perceive information is just as important as sharing it. We talk all the time about sharing appropriate information, sharing information about young people, but is the information that we share really representative of that child? So we can share that information as much as we want, but is it giving off the right message? Is it sharing the right story? Is it telling us who this young person is? More times it doesn't. So how we perceive that information is somewhat more important. We need to learn to be able to look past the labels that we see in front of us that are presented to us by people that don't necessarily know the children, you know, as well as other people. So what I mean by that is that social workers are fully responsible for young people's referrals and sharing information, yet from the system, they spend the least amount of time with the child. The foster carers spend the most, and schools do also. So where does their power and weight sit in information sharing? So we're going to explore some of this today. And the third thing is that the system is not permanent. We talk about this all of the time, of creating permanence for young people, which from my perspective is indeed one of the most important things. Yet our system doesn't support it. Young people will leave it. And we get in this conflict every time a young person leaves our care. Foster carers in schools, you'll know this from schools definitely, can you stay in touch with your pupils? It's a question that we ask ourselves all of the time. But yet when we're talking about children in care being permanent, having a sense of permanency, having stability, yet when they leave the system, we're always left with this confusion about, can we stay in touch with them? And there is no system for them to continue their experiences in care. The system goes, it's not permanent. So I really want you to understand that, because young people will remember you more than anything else. They don't remember the systems, they remember the people within them. And what happens with all young people is that they look back at some experiences in their life. We all do this. We all get to a certain age of adolescence. We look back in our life and we remember people. We have memories. And there's one thing that's the most key to all of this, is that when we're working with all young people, not just children in care, is to be able to spot moments where you can create memories for children. And those memories will be what you will be remembered within. So I always ask the question, like, how do you want to be remembered when working with young people? I'm hoping that some of these slides today can give you some insights on how to spot these moments where you can be really remembered as somebody that will give a child resilience, or give them some power and some ownership of who they are, and remember you in a really positive way later in life. So our external environment influences our internal experience. The narrative society create become our internal beliefs, and a narrative of society being a big thing. But if we just turn this into a micro thing for a moment, what is the narratives that we create within children's social care? Well, we have something called a referral or a profile. I think they're pretty much the same thing. We just like to change the words of things depending on what postcode we live in. But it's a statutory obligation for young people to have a referral or a profile written about them. And this is basically a list of things that explain who that young person is. And this list of things gets passed on to external stakeholders that will give young people opportunities. So external stakeholders being social workers, foster carers, schools, and you all read this rap sheet and have to make a judgment whether you will or will not take on that child, whatever that opportunity is. Now, when I was 13 years old, I remember moving in with one foster carer, well, a pair of foster carers called Jill and Gordon, and Up until this point, I'd been moved around from pillar to post. And I remember coming to this placement, and it's really strange every time you move house. At first, it's a bit weird, and it's a bit kind of, you don't kind of know who you're going to live with, where you're going to go, you feel uncomfortable. But I think like a lot of young people, you just get used to it. And you kind of get used to the behaviour that's presented to you by foster carers. A lot of the times, like, foster carers didn't expect me to stay there for very long. So that was the vibe I got when I moved in. Apart from these one foster carers who, in an argument once, when I said that I was going to run away, they stood their ground and said, if you run away, they were saying jokes like, you'll be cold, it's cold outside, like, why would you want to leave a warm bed? But mainly, if you run away, we'll still be here in the morning. And during this argument, I think they'd spotted a moment to communicate with me in a way that I would always remember, and I do remember to this day, which was about how I got to that foster placement. Now, a lot of young people don't really understand how it works. How do you go from one foster placement to another? We don't understand matching. We don't understand referrals. We don't understand the fact that it goes through some kind of system. We just find ourselves in somebody else's house, not knowing where we are, confused with who these people are. And, different foster carers try different techniques and tactics to try and build rapport or relationships with you. And some of them are authentic. Some of them seem a bit disingenuous, but these people were really genuine. And they said, Luke, we chose you to be here. And we get given these profiles and these referrals all of the time. We're specialist foster carers, and we chose you to be here. And Gordon, the foster carer, from then on called me Luke Skywalker, the chosen one, which made me extremely happy. But I want to show you what they chose me on. And this is a really normal document and a really normal set of behaviours that you might be quite familiar with. But the issue I have with this particular slide and these particular things that we write and that are common is that this is a statutory document that people have to see, and it either becomes a passport or a barrier for young people. It's never really neutral. And because these things are written more times than not when responding to crisis, which is another wonderful term of phrase, when we respond to crisis, the only things that ever get written down are informed by crisis. And you'll hear young people say that all of the time. When things are going well, they tend to somewhat feel left out, because we are in a world where we have this illusion that we just have to respond to and see crisis all of the time. So what was my referral at 13 years old? Luke is high risk of absconding. A persistent young offender with offences including burglary and affray. Known to deal with drugs and has been caught with drugs at school. Has stolen previous foster carer's car in the night. Don't go to sleep. Low attendance at school and is disengaged with other pupils. Luke has issues with attachment. He isolates himself in his room. We are seeking psychological assessment as we think this links to early childhood trauma. Disruptive behaviour when he is confronted with authority, and his outbursts are hard to control. Luke struggles to follow simple house rules when living in a foster placement. It's hard to build rapport with Luke, as he can be seen as guarded and closed. And Luke is an underachiever. It's I'd usually pause there and just give everybody a really long stare and see where everybody is, but the only thing I can see is my screen, so I'm not going to pause. But I'm sure some of the things that you see there are not uncommon. Now, the worst thing about these for me, despite the obvious, because I'm assuming that all of you in this room can work out the obvious, that this is not nice for the young person, but the worst thing for me is that it's not right for you as a professional, or as an adult actually, because let's just remove the labels for a second. As a human, like when you read these things, if you're reading these from the occupation of somebody that has to provide a service for young people to help, and you read that and you say to yourself, there's nothing I can do, I can't help this young person, You'll get so caught up in the complexity of all of those phrases, trying to work out some kind of support, some kind of system, or where you're going to hide your car keys, that you just feel that you can't make a difference. You actually start to tell yourself subliminally that you can't do your job, the thing that you got into do in the first place, which was to teach, to help, to support young people. When you say no to this young person, you're saying no to yourself having the ability to help. And I think over time, we can become desensitized to young people in care, or when we see these things, and we can very easily just say no. So how do we overcome it? I think it's actually really easy, is that we have a moral obligation to actually just say what happened. It's as simple as that. We contextualize every single statement. Some of those statements might be true. I might have stolen a car. But what is the contents around me stealing that car, and when did it happen, and how many times did it happen? And well, I even like your car because I stole a Golf, and if you don't have a Golf, I'm really not interested. You know, like there's so many things around it that you can look at. So, but what did Jill and Gordon see? Because they didn't see this list of behaviour. They said to the people that sent that, like, why? Why have we got ourselves to a point where a young person's behaving in this way and we're writing these things down? What have we done to fail that young person? It's not our fault, but it's certainly our responsibility to understand. So I want to read you those again, but I just want to tell you exactly what happened, just to see how you feel. Because the decisions that we make a lot of the times are informed by how we feel, and obviously about what we read. So Luke is high risk of absconding. Well, I was late home and my foster carers reported me missing. They had to do that. They were told to. A persistent young offender with offences including burglary and affray. I took my own PlayStation from my dad's house when he was out at work. I wasn't living with him at the time. He was pretty annoyed by that and he attacked me in the street. I got arrested for burglary and affray. Known to deal with drugs and has been caught with the drugs at school. Well, like all my friends, I tried cannabis at school. It's just I had to have an intervention meeting with a drugs worker and a police officer, and they got grounded. He couldn't ground me, though. It was false imprisonment because I know my rights. A stolen previous foster carer's car in the night. This is the nicest way I can fluff this one up, so you're just going to have to bear with me. But my mum asked me to go and live with her again, and I was really scared and alone about living with those foster carers. So I took their car to see my mum, and I did it once, and I was really shaken after I'd done it and really regretted my actions. Low attendance at school and is disengaged with other pupils. When you've been to 11 primary schools, you always feel like you're losing friends. Luke has issues with attachment. I found it, and my parents rejected me from a young age, and I found it hard to settle into a foster family. He isolates himself in his room. We are seeking psychological assessment as we think this links to early childhood trauma. There was a period in my life where I always used to hide away because every time I came out of my room, someone kept reminding me that my stepdad beat me up. Disruptive behaviour when he's confronted with authority, and his outbursts are hard to control. Always been told where to live without being given a choice upsets you when you have to move from a settled foster family. Why? Because settled foster families can sometimes just be temporary. Luke struggles to follow simple house rules when living in a foster placement. When you live with so many families, you struggle to know what's right and what's wrong. A simple one is, do I keep my shoes on or do I take them off when I enter the house? Because everyone has different roles. It's hard to build rapport with Luke as he can be seen as guarded and closed. There was a period in my time when I didn't think that anybody would ever love me. And Luke is an underachiever. Well, actually, Luke's an award-winning social entrepreneur, so nobody ever expected that one. These are a total passport or a barrier for young people getting opportunities. And back to the second point that I suggested at the start, like sharing information, sharing these documents is really important. It's actually statutory, but how you perceive them is far more important. And my advice would be, when you see profiles and referrals like this that may represent young people in a negative way, is give them a chance. See what they're really like. Give them a phone call, meet them. You know, don't take what these things say as absolute for this young person. This is somebody else's interpretation of a young person's experience. And if it's not contextualized, then that's our duty, is to contextualize and find out why. So I think that's my first bit done. And I think I now need to stop and wait for questions.
I'm going to kick off with a question for Luke and ask of all the things that you just showed us on your referral form there, which one do you think was the most unhelpful in terms of what happened to you after that?
Most unhelpful. Well, I suppose they're all unhelpful in different ways, depending on where you're going. So, what's the most unhelpful? I mean, some of them just don't even really. I mean, hard to build rapport with Luke as he can be seen as guarded and closed. My response to something like that was like, "What do you expect me to do with this information?" I think that it's hard to pinpoint what the most unhelpful thing is. I think what's clear for me is about like what are we supposed to do with that information that we get given? You know, like when I see young people's referrals, it's kind of going through. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this now? So I think the most unhelpful things are hard thing to point to, but I think things that kind of like hard to build rapport with Luke as can be seen as guarded and closed. It just doesn't seem to have any value whatsoever in that form. Like, and a lot of the things are like that. I think the unhelpful thing also is about stealing the car, because it did become quite a contentious point every single time I moved to a different house. One foster carer threatened to break my fingers if I stole his car, which was a joke. So please, nobody panic. But yeah, these things kind of live with you. You carry them around. So they're all unhelpful, I think, from the ones that I've shown to begin with. But yeah, with particular interest in how to build rapport with Lucas, he can be seen as guarded and close, because it doesn't what we're supposed to do with it. How am I supposed to? Yeah, it doesn't help. It's not helpful at all.
Okay, thanks, Luke. We're starting to get questions through now, so these are coming in from participants. How did you feel when you found out your information was being shared with carers? How did that make you feel?
Well, it was actually quite nice to know that people were sharing information about me at first, because one of the most frustrating things for me and for young people is having to repeat your story. So it was actually felt quite good that foster carers had the information about me. I was like, all right, cool. People do talk about me. You know, that's that, because it you know, a lot of the times you knew they didn't, because you were telling them everything about your life, and you kind of as a kid expected them to know. So, but that will be different for each young people. Some young people will not want to have the foster carers know anything about them. But for me, it was nice. It's just what I read wasn't nice.
And one of the other questions that's come in that follows on nicely is, how old were you when you read that referral form? Did you read it when you were 13, or did you read it later?
No, I didn't read it when I was 13. I read that a lot later. So I actually read that when I was about 19, 20. So when Jill and Gordon was telling me about me being the chosen one, they didn't show me what I was chosen on. They just told me that they got sent basically like files on files of young people. So no, it was later that I read that.
Okay, and somebody else has asked what year that was in. I presume they're not trying to work out how old you are, but more whether or not things might have changed since that time. So
yeah, what year was it in? So it would have been 16 years ago. So you can work out how old I am if I was 13. Fine. Yeah, no, I mean, and are they trying to work out if it's changed? Well, it hasn't changed. That's the thing. It's a cultural norm to write these things about young people, and the cultural norm is still lives well within our organisations. So I don't think it's changed. I think that we were more aware of it, but I think that what we write about young people, a lot of the things that you've just seen are still very common across all service areas.
And did your document, your referral form, have any positives listed in it, or was it all negatives like that?
Well, when I got that piece of document, that was a document provided to me by Jill and Gordon in their own format. So that's word for word what was on there. The only thing I actually captured when I left care, it wasn't my files, it was my looked after children review minutes. So which would actually a mixture of things, because obviously you have the opportunity as a young person to comment in those meetings. So yeah, it was a mixture of things. Nobody really, I don't know, for me, nobody really wrote anything too positive down. But it also wasn't negative, it was pragmatic. Like looked after children's reviews are very much like, who's going to take him to the dentist, who's going to do this, who's going to do that.
Okay, and one person asks, I've heard about the concept of a right to be forgotten in terms of children's histories. And do you think that's a useful idea in terms of care as well?
I am not aware of the right to be forgotten, so I need to understand that a little bit more before I try and answer.
I think it's sort of the idea that things that might appear about a young person online have to,
Yeah,
can go away, so they don't become part of the kind of permanent history of that young
yeah,
person.
yeah. I think so. I think a lot of the stuff you can get rid of that's time based. So, like for example, young people will behave out of character in moments where they feel under pressure or re-experiencing trauma, and they'll regret these things because they come from a really tough place emotionally. So yeah, time-based things can be forgotten. So things that happened a long time ago that have not happened again, I think those things we can get rid of. And as well, these are the things that you want to be discussing with each young people. Like, that if you have a relationship with a child, which is what we all aim to do, this particular, you'll be able to have these conversations with young people once you have a relationship with them. But the question really is how much power do we have as a service to remove those things? Because it's great to say that this right to be forgotten works, but what we also don't know and we don't understand is how much power we have as workers to challenge the systems that are recording this information. That's another thing that I would include on top of that, is that, do we feel confident and able to challenge the systems that record information about young people? Because we certainly should be encouraged to do so. So yeah, I think the power to be forgotten is definitely important. I think it's equally as important that we feel confident and capable as adults to challenge the systems that record those information.
We're getting quite a lot of questions now, so we're not going to be able to get through all of these. So I'm going to ask a few more and then ask Luke to do the second half of his presentation, and then there'll be another opportunity to ask questions. So Luke, were you ever asked to contribute to your own profile? Was that just what was written about you?
Yeah, no, I was never asked to contribute, but I think I was quite a difficult young person. I think even if I was asked, I would have probably said go away. So I think that I think that's probably the case for a lot of young people.
And how much, to put this back into the school context a little bit more, how much information would you have wanted your school to know about you? So that referral form, of course, was for foster carers, but schools get to see similar documents, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose minimal. I suppose it's like, what does a normal, and I'm going to say the word normal because children in care will often use that word, like, what does a normal child want from their school? Like, and what information do parents give their schools? I think that we need to provide schools with crucial safeguarding information, or information that protects the young person. But I don't know many kids that are just going to want the schools to know every single minute detail of that child's experience and behaviour. Nor do they actually need to know. So I think the less schools know about sort of other people's interpretations of me, the better, because I think we're opening that up into there's just too much variation of opinion to manage that well. But certainly sharing information that's key and crucial to keep that young person safe and to keep that school safe. But yeah, for me, less.
And that's sort of there's a question there that kind of follows on that nicely, and it's the kind of the balance between the honesty about what's happened in the past for a child and the future for the child, and how do you balance off providing a realistic picture for school or for foster care as opposed to having that respect for the child? Do you have any sort of ideas and thoughts about how that might be navigated in a better way?
Yeah, I mean, us as human beings, giving the young people opportunities. And again, you just got to remember that the people that pass on and write these profiles spend the least amount of time with the child. So, and it will also be several people over several periods of time. So what you're seeing is actually maybe factual information written by several different people at several points in time that have several different opinions of that young person. So it's kind of like a conglomeration of a collaboration of people's ideas of young people and analyses of a young person. So I just put that back on other people and say, well, actually, it's up to you to interpret that in your way. And the most important thing is that you make your own judgment of the young person. And if we're going to work in a school where we teach primary school children not to judge a book by its cover, we should follow our own advice.
Okay, and oh, sorry, I've just lost the question I was about to ask there. So the final one that I just before we move on to your second half of your presentation, how would you have described yourself if you had written the document?
Oh, the most well-behaved, sweetest child that's ever going to walk into your schools. You know, obviously, I was the most well-behaved person, Neil. How would I describe myself? Challenging. Yeah, definitely displays challenging behaviour. Enjoys heated discussion. I really enjoyed kind of the things that I was told about me as a kid was that I would challenge teachers. I would get involved in like heated debate. Like I actually really enjoyed that. There was something really fun about that. But it was always seen as negative. How else would I have described myself? Energetic, doesn't sit still. Would benefit much more doing activities that require energetic exertion rather than meticulous thought. Like I don't know, like some young people work well with academia, some young people work well doing other things. Like so, I think that being able to be strengths based would be a really useful thing. Telling people what I was actually interested in, which was sport, which was like design technology. Like I was a doer. I did things, and I still do things now. Like I was, and none of that was there. And I think that's always useful. Actually, like being able to tell people what I actually enjoy doing and what I'm good at. And then you can actually make deals with young people. Then you can kind of bribe them. Listen, if you do well in this class, then we can do, you can do this thing or this activity, or, if people need to have a break, they can go and do other things. Like I think that understanding what young people enjoy doing, it sounds basic, but it's really easily missed, because then you get an understanding of how what things that young person enjoy doing. So how can your school adapt and change and provide them those things, which will really help and will help you build a relationship. But it's up to the schools, isn't it, to want to do those things? Because but yeah, strengths based. Tell people like what that young person enjoys doing, who that young person is, through the things that they enjoy. I think it's really a basic, simple thing.
Okay, thanks for that, Luke. I'm sorry to those people who haven't had their questions asked. As I say, we've actually got over 30 questions have come in, so I will return to some of those a bit later if they're still relevant. But now I'm going to ask Luke to move on to look at more specifically about how school worked for him, and particularly about the sort of daily and weekly routine. So back over to you then, Luke.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah. All right. So how does this kind of like affect schools? And I always explain this like in terms of the journey of the information. So if you imagine that the information that will always sit within the child with the child social worker, because that's just where it sits, and the social worker will then pass information to the school and also pass information to the foster care. But what gets confusing about schools and foster care is that if schools don't know who their children in care are, and some teachers don't, lots of schools are not aware, and there's something like a school trip and we need consent, then what will happen is the schools will ring the foster carer, and then the foster carer will be like, oh, I need to ask the social worker. And then the schools are like, what do you mean ask the social worker? And it can sometimes get into this kind of confusing. And now all of a sudden that we know the child's in care, this kind of triangle between the social worker, the foster carer and the school is really unclear and varies completely differently depending on the school that you're in. Really that, and whether the young person wants you to know they're in care or not, because obviously they have the right to refuse school from knowing also now. But what happens when a young person comes into school and school are not necessarily aware of who that child is, just in terms of their timetable and what commitments that child has? So when you're in care, you have a timetable. You have to commit to certain things. When you're in care that you have to do. It's statutory. There's certain particular things that you have to attend as a young person, because if you don't attend these things, like a looked after children's review, your local authority will be slammed by Ofsted for not engaging young people in decisions that affect their lives. Now that's just bonkers. Sitting young people in a room with their mum and their dad and a psychologist maybe, and a doctor and a teacher and a social worker and a foster carer, such an intense environment. And if the young person doesn't turn up to that, the systems are then told off for it by Ofsted. You can understand the pressure that we then put onto young people that might not necessarily want to go to these things. We kind of force young people to do things that they don't like so that we can ensure we don't get told off via Ofsted. And And then in the same breath, we ask young people how they would like to be engaged in things, but yet we're limited in terms of what we can change. So within all of this kind of system, schools fit into this place somewhere. And what I want to do is just run you through this timetable, which we call the dual timetable, or the two timetables we also call it. So you may hear us using the two phrases. And I want to play this in two parts. One is the first part is just me at school. And I want you to forget for a second that I'm a child in care. School don't know that I'm in care at this point. Only a few members of staff do. So I want to run you through a normal week and how school respond to this, not knowing that there's a child in care. So I'm late on Monday morning for maths class, and my teacher comes up to me and says, "Why are you late?" And my instant response is, "Piss off, sir." And I storm to the back of the room. And he does that thing when you only get really angry and they speak through their teeth and they go, "Get out," and start spitting, and you know you've annoyed them. And you get this sense of pride once you do that as a young person, if I'm honest. But then they put you in detention on a Thursday night and they say, "I'm going to go and tell Mr. Toy you're head of year." You're like, "All right, sir, please don't." But you know, you and Mr. Toy are like best mates, and you know you're going to get away with it. But you can't let your teacher know that, because it will somewhat take the thunder from him. But then you don't bring your homework on a Tuesday for the same maths teacher, and you can understand now that he's absolutely furious with you and he's taking it personal. And he tells you that you were probably spending time with your friends this weekend when you should have been doing your homework, young man. And you're furious and you're telling him to piss off again, right? And you're getting into serious trouble at this point. And you know, you can feel that rage within you because schools are putting so much pressure on you. But that teacher then goes to the staff room and says, "I'm sick of Luke. He's late every Monday morning and now he's forgotten my homework." And everybody in that school now knows who Luke is. So when you forget your PE kit on a Wednesday, the PE teacher already knows who you are. He's already heard about you. So he makes you sit on the step in the rain and watch everybody else play rugby when you know full well he can get your lost property out of the PE kit, out of the lost property box. But you kind of get into this power battle, don't you, with some teachers? We all do it. I still do it. You know, I do it with young people sometimes. I've got to check myself. But young people start to kind of like poke at you and get at you, and you don't allow it. So you poke and you get back because you're in control. You're the winner. When you get into those power battles with young people, you will always lose. You'll think that you'll win, but you will lose because you will punish that young person and remove them, and you will suppress their behaviour because you'll just see things on a behaviour level because we go into that response. So when I told this teacher to piss off, I knew I was getting suspended because he was quite a big authoritative PE teacher, and I knew by him saying that he'd heard about me in the staff room that word had got around about me enough. I don't show up to my detention, but by now you expect this because you expect Luke to behave in that way. And of course I will see my friends on the weekend because you don't even give me the opportunity to say anything different. And if I do, I'm told to be quiet a lot of the times. But what happens if I've been in care for a really long time and I don't see my friends on the weekend, but I see my mum? We call that contact. But you don't just see your mum on a Sunday night, you see her all day Sunday, and if the day before you see your dad on the Saturday afternoon. So you can't really see your friends. And the worst thing about seeing your dad on a Saturday is it tells you how much your mum doesn't like you. And the worst thing about seeing your mum on a Sunday is she tells you how much your dad doesn't like you and that they're both lying about each other. The only thing you want to do on a Monday morning is call your social worker, but she starts work after you start school, so you're going to be late. And your foster care is panicking because she's trying to get you to school, and she knows if you don't go to school, she's going to be in trouble because she can't let you stay at home, even though she knows you just want to ring your social worker. Then your maths teacher asks you why you're late, and you just lose it. You think about it all day. You want to ring your social worker, you can't really think about learning actually, because you know what it's like when you're going through something difficult at home. I'm sure some of you have been through divorce and had to go to work. It's nothing much different apart from losing your parents and having to go to school. Then on Tuesday, you go into drama and it's Mr. Toy, your head of year, and you know that the maths teacher's had a word with him the day before, and he comes up to you and he says, "You all right?" Even though you're late, he says, "You all right?" I said, "I'm not really, sir." He says, "What do you need?" And I says, "I don't know." He says, "Listen, go to my office, call your social worker." And he says, "But I need to talk to you about something before you go." "What the fuck are you doing telling your maths teacher to piss off for?" And do you know when a teacher swears, you're like, whoa, you're cool. I like that. He says, "You can't do that." He says, "I have to tell you off. I have to punish you because he needs to see that I'm doing something. Otherwise, he won't respect me. But at the same time, I understand you're going through something. So what do you need?" He says, "So I'll ring my social worker." He says, "Okay." He says, "But you know, this outburst can't happen again. I need to punish you. How do I punish you?" I says, "You put me in isolation, sir." He says, "No problem." So he used to come into isolation when I was in isolation and remove all of the other boys. All I used to do in isolation was tap on the divider of the wall between the two lads, that was me and this other lad, and slide notes underneath. Mr. Toy picked up on that. He said, you keep tapping on that wall all of the time. The first question he asked me, he says, what do you want to do with your life? And I'll tell you, when people usually ask that question, they're usually asking it because they want to try and tell you something like, if you carry on the way you're going, you're not going to get very far, which is a really unhelpful thing to say, by the way. We should just probably stop it. But so you kind of get into expectation of that response. I expect you to want to drive me down a path somewhere and tell me that what I'm doing currently is not going to help me later on in life. But you don't. You just tell me that, that's what you do. But Mr. Toy didn't. He said, what do you want to do with your life? I'm not interested about your previous experiences. I'm interested about what you want to do in the future. So you keep tapping on that wall all the time. You've ever thought of the forces, give you some discipline, give you the camaraderie, the lads. He says, and they'll pay for your house and things like that. You realise this. It'll give you some stability, give you a bit of discipline, mate. We all know you need a bit of that. No, thanks, sir. I'm not interested. Most people will give up there. No, I've tried to talk to him. It just goes in one ear, out the other. No point. Crack on with your algebra then. Super important life skill, that, mate. But he didn't. He said, okay. Fair enough. He says, well, think about it like this. You join the forces, they'll teach you how to be a pilot. You'll become a pilot. You fly all around the world. Now, when you come home, you can fly commercial planes and you'll be responsible for flying people to their honeymoons and to their holidays. Like, it's called altruism. Have you ever heard of altruism, Luke? Because you're extremely altruistic. No, I haven't, sir. So he explains altruism to me and I start to feel nice, if I'm honest. And I start to like the idea of this thing, but I don't give him that. So I can't give him that. It's a weakness. And I don't believe in myself. So no thanks, sir. I'm not interested. I want to get on with my algebra. Starting to get a bit annoyed now because he's being too nice. Most people can become offended by this because we're giving a part of ourselves to a young person. We're giving an emotional response to a child to try and get through to them. And they push it back in our faces. And it hurts because we're human beings. But I apologise on behalf of all children. We're not trying to hurt you. We're just scared about what you represent. Because if you represent a positive relationship, they usually go and that hurts. And the anticipation of waiting for that to happen causes more damage than it happening itself because I'm used to it happening, but I'm scared to wait for it to happen. So he tries a third time and he says, well, think about it like this, Luke. When you join something like the RAF, they'll fly you all over the world. They'll fly you to different countries, which I was really confused about. I couldn't understand why we were flying to different countries and not blowing them up, because I thought if you're in the forces, you just blow everything up. He was like, no, sir, no, Luke, that's not what we do. We're friends with people that we don't want to blow up. He says, but they'll teach you how to play rugby. You'll go to places like South Africa and you'll play their forces in the rugby, and then you can be a rugby coach, and you can come home and you can train other young people how to play rugby. And then when one of your young people scores a try, you can stand on the try line, just like I do every single Saturday, and watch you play. And I know that when you score a try, Luke, I'm the first person that you look for. So despite all of this bravado, I know you're listening. Couldn't really argue with that every single Saturday, Mr. Toy, who had nothing to do with the rugby team whatsoever, nothing, came to watch me play every single Saturday. And every single time I scored, I looked for him. I've never been a child that's looked at a try line and seen nobody there. I've experienced other things, but I've never experienced that. But in that room, I said to him I wasn't interested in what he had to say. But at 19 years old, years and years later, when I'd finished my A-levels, I went and joined the RAF, and I wouldn't have done it had it not have been for that conversation. You can spot moments that young people will remember. You've just not got to act in a way that they expect, and you've certainly not got to act in a way that's trying to overbear them and force them to do something when they seem traumatized or they seem upset. It's just remove traumatized from it. When young people seem upset, anger will be the first thing that they display a lot of the times. Young people have been made to feel and been upset because they've lost people. If they become close to teachers and to staff, they'll push you away because they're scared you'll go too. We do this thing when we looked after children's reviews in schools like we're doing young people a favour. So, Luke, you don't like physics? No, I hate it. Cool, we'll put your looked after review over your physics class. How does that sound? Brilliant, love it, great. Miss Physics to go into my looked after children's review. What a treat. But then they say, but before you go into your looked after children's review, you need to go to physics and just get on the register. Can you do that? So you go to physics, you get on the register, and then the receptionist opens the door and whispers across the classroom, "It's Luke here." I mean, it's like everybody can hear you. Why are we whispering? So then you go to looked after children's review, you can see your mum and dad sat over there and everyone's talking about them like they're bad parents. You're getting really upset because you want to see them, but you're not allowed. And then when your meeting's finished, after you've been asked your latest sexual experience, your IRO turns to you. And for those that don't know what an IRO is, it's an independent reviewing officer. It's a social worker specifically employed to chair these meetings. Looks at you and says, "Are you all right getting yourself back to class, Luke?" "Yeah, of course I am. Definitely not going to biology, and I'm definitely not going to my detention, and now I'm suspended." Late again for art, but similar story of the teacher. We don't have the time to tell you, and not bringing the PE kit again on a Friday. But why didn't I bring my PE kit for both occasions? Well, who buys it? The social worker or the foster carer? And while the foster carer is trying to have a discussion with the social worker about who buys the kit and which pocket funding and allowance this comes from, I'm the person that's getting told off at school for not having it. And after all this week, I spend my time in bed and I never get to see my friends. The system puts so many expectations on us to approach and behave towards young people in a particular way. It won't work. The only thing that works, the only thing you'll ever hear young people say is about people. It's about foster carers, about social workers, about adults, about human beings, intending to create environments where young people feel safe and can be loved, where they intend to create an environment where they can learn, where they intend to listen, where they intend to build relationships. If you expect young people to listen to what you've got to say, if you expect young people to learn what you've got to teach, if you expect young people to follow these rules, you're always going to get into power battles. You can intend to be kind. And if anything ever goes wrong in that space, you can always communicate your intention. You know, we can't promise young people are going to be who they want to be, or go where they want to go, or, I don't know, do the things they want to do. We can't promise them that they're going to do that because we don't know. And they also might change their mind. You know what young people are like. 1 minute they want to be an astronaut, next minute they want to be, I don't know, a police officer. But by helping young people find out who they are, like who they truly are, like their mirror image of themselves, and letting them know that person is welcome, is a million times better than any of this. And if you keep children at the heart of everything that you do, you'll give them the strength to put their heart in everything that they do. And I never want you to forget that. So I think I have just finished bang on time. So wonderful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Luke. That was really interesting and really inspiring as well. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to kick off straight away with one which was actually posed in the last session, but kind of is more relevant here, which is about, was there anything that helped you with sort of school on a day-to-day basis? What sort of kept you going?
Priddles. So Miss Pridmore. So you'd have them as SEND leads now, or designated teachers, whatever we call them in schools. Yeah, I had somebody in a porter cabin that was like the lady you'd go and have a cup of tea with, and she would give you crayons to draw. And although I completely rejected anything like crayons to draw with because they were extremely childish, and obviously I was like a man at like 12 years old in my head, she wasn't scared about reminding me I was a child and reminding me that, you know, I should enjoy my childhood and that I shouldn't grow up too quickly, and that, you know, I didn't need to do that. And I think having somebody there that is gentle and warm and kind and loving, and the type of person that you'd have in your family that's not really your auntie, but you call them your auntie, you know, we've all got one. Having someone like that in school makes a big difference. That also somewhat disagrees with the school system, not obviously seriously, but kind of like can say things like, yeah, I know this is a bit rubbish, isn't it? Or, you know, we kind of understand you. That's the biggest key, and a lot of young people will say the same thing. Okay,
thank you. Do keep sending your questions in, I should say, as well. As I say, we've still got 10 minutes to go. I'm going to read this one alphabetum because I think it's quite important. The person says, this is the second time I've seen your talk and I still get tears. I'm now in the CLA team. How can I help a young person open up to me?
Oh, God.
No pressure on this one, Luke.
Yeah, God, yeah. How do I get a young person to open up to me? Just keep creating an environment which would encourage that to happen. So I don't know what you want them to open up to you about. That's probably important to know. But what I do know is that like young people will do that when they're ready and when they feel safe. So if I was to go back onto the concept of intention versus expectation, don't ever expect that young person to open up to you, but intend every time you see them to create an environment where it's safe to do so. And know going into that space that that's what you're going to do. And don't beat yourself up about it if they don't. You know, really the worst thing that we can do in this space is really try to achieve something. And if it doesn't happen, give ourselves a hard time about it. Just intend to create an environment where they feel safe. That's what young people need to open up. They just need to feel safe and they need to feel that they can trust you. So work towards that and everything else will be okay. And I'm sorry that that's as cryptic as I can be, because it's a difficult question to answer. But asking the question means you're already doing the right thing because you care about it.
Okay. If 29-year-old Luke could call 13-year-old Luke, what advice would you give yourself?
I'd put him in prison probably, and I'd say, "Listen, mate, come on, you need to sort this out. You're going to get yourself in serious trouble." No, what would I say? What would I say to 13-year-old me? I'd laugh at 13-year-old me, I think, and I can say this confidently because I work with 13-year-old me's all the time. I don't take it so seriously. Like, they're young people. They're kind of like undeveloped consciousness. Do you know what I mean? They're still undeveloped brains. They have no idea who they are. Do you know what I mean? They really don't. Yeah, even though they might be like, yeah, this is who I am. They just don't. So I suppose 13-year-old me, I would find somewhat endearing. I wouldn't have an issue with challenging whatsoever, like actually challenging their thoughts and their theories in an intellectual way, because I wasn't a stupid kid. What I definitely would never do to a 13-year-old Luke is tell them that they're behaving like a child or project an opinion onto them. I think you'll only ever get your head bitten off if you do that. And it's not the right thing for us to do either. But yeah, I'd also try and figure out if 13-year-old Luke was saying, this is crap, this is this, this is that, this is this. I'd be asking them, all right, cool. I hear a lot of problems. Then what do you want to do? How do you want to solve it? You know, don't raise a problem, mate. If you're not willing to raise a solution, I'll be willing to work towards it, which I think is a really important message. So yeah, I would never make an opinion or project opinion onto 13-year-old Luke, but I would definitely challenge 13-year-old Luke, because if they're saying that everything's not working and all this is rubbish and then I'd be asking to provide solutions, and engaging in that rather than telling them that their ideas are stupid or anything like that. I think that's just really not a good idea.
So I've got a question. It's quite a long one, so I'm going to sort of paraphrase it down to save time, which is, how do you think that schools should deal with foster carers in terms of having parental authority and so on? What tips are there for schools in terms of that kind of relationship that they have with foster carers?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer because I'm trying to read what's in it, and the word deal with foster carers suggests that you may have difficult foster carers because of the word deal.
Oh no, that's my word. That's not the original question. That's my paraphrase.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll tell you something practical. First and foremost, is Google the local authority you're from, followed by the words delegated authority policy, because foster carers have the power to make everyday decisions now for children. Which could include things like haircuts and all sorts of bits and bobs. But I think it's difficult because when you come into things like school trips, there's a big confusion about who signs that off. So because of parental responsibility, so I don't know the answer to the question unless I was having a one-to-one conversation with this person. But the facts are that foster carers have the legal responsibility now to make everyday decisions that that impact children's lives, with the exception of a medical treatment that isn't emergency, and I think also school trips. But please fact check that. So yeah, so foster carers, I don't know. It's really difficult. Foster carers might not make decisions for schools and say it's a responsibility of the social worker. They might, so that I don't know. It's a hard question to answer because I don't know the contents in which it's been asked. But the foster carers have delegated authority, so they can make everyday decisions for children in care. The two that are contested are around medical treatment that's not emergency and school trips. So going away, actually, like overnights and things like that. So anything else, the foster carers should be able to have the right to sign off. But I'm not a social worker, so I would really recommend also fact checking that.
Mm. And is there a particular, if you like, a kind of way in which schools should be working with foster carers? Are there any tips that you can give there about everyday communication or whatever?
It's like I suppose like you would communicate with any other child's parent. It's on a young person by young person basis. Like a young person might be in school, might not need any communication whatsoever with their foster carers because they might just be an ideal student, students that we all dream about. And then a young person might be really challenging and need to have communication with the foster carer, just like you would a parent. So I would just imagine that child, you speaking to that child's parent, and just respect them as if it's their parent, would be my advice. I think the foster carers more times than not would appreciate that, because foster carers can sometimes feel like they're also as powerless as the young person. And I think it's a good basis to start because it somewhat normalizes the young person's experience. But again, I don't know that the young people, you know your young people and you know those foster carers. So there is no rule book to communicate with human beings. There is, we make our own judgment based on who we see. It's exactly the same with young people in care and their foster carers. But be armed with knowledge. Find out about delegated authority. I really would. It's from the Fostering Network, 2000 and I think 2013, 12, 13. Just Fostering Network, delegated authority, or your local authority followed by delegated authority. You'll find out lots of information.
Okay. Thanks, Luke. And final question, because I'm conscious of time. Moving on. Thinking back to your school timetable, would additional space or allocated space around sort of pastoral time or one-to-one interaction have been helpful to you, do you think? Is there something that could have been done to your timetable to ease some of these things up?
Yeah, I had that. So the timetables from my first school that I got expelled from, and then I went to a second school which did just that, and I didn't get expelled from it. So therefore, I think that's a positive outcome, right? But yeah, that's what I had at the second school, was just basically space for me to use in whatever way that I wanted. And I also wasn't required to do 15,000 GCSEs like every other child. I kicked up a fuss and said I only needed to do the baseline to get to college. So there was a reduced timetable for me as well, which was really helpful. And some people will turn their eyebrows up at that and be like, no, we can't give reduced timetables. But you're not really reducing the timetable, because we have another timetable outside of school. You're just kind of making it somewhat even. So I'm actually doing more in schools because I've got my school timetable and my out of school timetable. So reducing my GCSEs. So I actually just did 5 of the maths, English, science, IC and geography and ICT. So and ICT and English there was some more within it. And then I had time to also go to see Miss Priddles to talk about the work I was struggling with. That just works like a dream. And the teachers that I didn't like and that didn't like me, I'm sure it worked like them for a dream too, because I didn't go to their lessons anymore. Do you know what I mean? So like, it's okay not to like children as well, and offloading the staff room about it, but we've just got to be aware that people do annoy us, and we just can't project it onto them. A lot of the time it's not their fault, but it is frustrating. So yeah, that time works really well. And also for me, reduced timetable worked, but reduced to the point that wouldn't affect me getting into college. And then plus I was always like, well, I only need 5 GCSEs to get into college anyway, so I'm just not going to go to these classes because I don't need them. I was that type of kid. Some would say you work smart, you don't work hard. I think that's a good analogy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Luke. It feels a little bit strange not to ask for a round of applause at this point, but I please imagine one if you will. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That's been absolutely brilliant. It's a shame that we have to draw it to a close. We will try to respond to other questions that came in. Unfortunately, we had over 50 questions coming in, so we weren't able to ask them all, but we will try to follow up as best we can with those that we didn't have a chance to address today. So thank you all to everyone listening, all 200 or so of you. We're very, very grateful for your time this afternoon. Hopefully you found that useful. And we're in the process of planning our next webinar for the Timpson programme. It will probably be in September time, and it will probably be focusing on the response to issues around attachment and trauma at the local authority level at the virtual school. So do keep an eye out for announcements for that in due course as well. But other than that, I will tie up this this webinar today, and thank you again to everyone concerned.
Brilliant.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.